One of the things I raised the other day with scrutiny was that there is a requirement that terms of reference for scrutiny includes, one of these is to scrutinise legislation and international conventions and agreements. And I asked them whether they'd ever done that, and they wrote back and said, as far as they know, never. Now this touches on so fundamental to scrutinise. How can you scrutinise virtually anything that comes through government these days, unless you look at it in the context of international governments and agreements? What do you think? Is it possible to scrutinise anything effectively these days on a strictly parochial, insular level?
Some of them can be done, but generally, as you're intimating, we're obviously affected more and more by international conventions and so forth. You could almost make it one of a checklist of questions that have to be gone through before you go into the more open-ended side of the scrutiny. You know, what are the international implications? What conventions apply to this area? Which of them have we signed? What has been our response to date, etc.?
Which are the very questions I've been asking scrutiny for many, many years, but they don't even have a list of conventions which apply, so any scrutiny panel would have difficulty to know whether... I mean, obviously there are all sorts of implications about this, and one of the implications of this is the actual manpower, person power that's going to be required to carry out all these examinations. Scrutiny panels of 2 or 3 people are hopelessly understaffed. They can't possibly undertake the sort of research that's necessary. I know they've got some employees, some people paid employees to do some work, and you're allowed to employ consultants outside on occasions. One of the ironies is that you're not necessarily allowed to see the Crown Officer's advice to he's advised the committees, which is a ridiculous situation if ever there was one. What do you, that side of it, the day-to-day running of the practical side, the learned investigation, how can that take place in the Jersey scenario?
Well, one thing you've got to accept, and it might upset a few people to say it, but if you're going to start going into looking at legislation and conventions, then you've got to have the people with the intellect to do it anyway. And I would say that there's many people in the States who, you can see from any debate, they contribute nothing whatsoever. They sit there, they'll press the button basically in support of whatever the Council of Ministers puts forward. So until you've got that amount of ability within the states to take those issues on, and let's be honest, some of them are very, very complicated, and unless you've got the backup in terms of officers, which scrutiny hasn't, you're probably quite right, it's not going to happen.
And that's as the system is now. Just before we go, I wanted to go on to the actual manpower that's going to be under the electoral reforms that are likely to come. The idea that you can have individuals bringing their complaints to scrutiny. Now that in the past has been frowned upon, that an individual, they say it's not a complaints board, but the complaints board itself is totally ineffective. If you get a dozen complaints considered in a year, that's as most as you'll get. Places like Gibraltar, as I've said to you many times, might get thousands, a little place, 28,000 population, get thousands of complaints dealt with by their ombudsman equivalent. There's no overlap between complaints board, administrative decisions and procedure, and the scrutiny boards. There ought to be, in my view. Why can't individuals bring their cases to scrutiny and have them properly examined by scrutiny? Why not?
Well, because ostensibly, as you've just intimated, Mike, there's another system that deals with that. Now, the issue surely then should be, well, why don't we try and strengthen that other system? I've never fully understood, sorry, going off on a slight tangent, why the complaints board doesn't work, because it has no less and no more powers than the ombudsman. And there's a feeling out there that ombudsmen work more effectively. They only work more, as I understand it, more effectively in the sense that they're generally a one-person show, backed up by a little staff. And they can therefore, one assumes, work much more quickly. But there is no power to what they say. They simply make a recommendation. And a department in the UK, for example, responds to that recommendation as to whether or not. Now, it does happen in most other jurisdictions. A far greater percentage of recommendations are accepted than is the case here.
Do you accept the premise? I mean, in Jersey is not such a utopia that so few cases of complaints arise. There can't be a dozen. It's such an unrealistic figure per annum, whereas somewhere like Gibraltar has thousands.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not realistic, is it?
We've got
that electoral commission, that famous body which is beavering away as we're talking here, dreaming up the next stage of their wonderful reforms. They've got this magic 42, they'll reduce the number of states members. To my mind, it's already desperately struggling under the existing number, 51 states members. 42 is going to be an impossibly small number to work with, and scrutiny especially is going to be so underpersoned, it will not work. Do you think it can work with that number of people?
It could work, perhaps if we had a party political system, but we're not going to have that. You've got to go back to why do we want to reduce the numbers when you think we've had 53 members, now 51, for a great number of years. The world's never been as complex as it is now. So you have to ask, why are we really reducing it? And the real reason, because some people want it reduced, is so it's more like a Politburo basically. It'll just rubber stamp that free market, user pays, and there will be no challenge. It will be a consensus government without consensus, if you like. You'll toe the party line. So it's probably not a good thing overall. No.
What do you think, Deputy? Is it that bad?
No, I think I don't entirely agree with Trevor's analysis. What I think is odd. How did 43 get arrived at? Was it some,
42.
42.
Yes. 42.
Was it some rational analysis of the workload and how it could be divided out and so forth and so on? I mean, one of the issues is, and it's been alluded to earlier in this discussion, is whether all states members are working at the same level. Is whether the constables, who are playing, albeit in the small numbers at the moment operating, are playing quite a role on scrutiny at the moment, but whether they are fully operating as full states members as well as fully in their constable role, which is what we are told they are doing. I think there are questions about that, and I think it is possible to run scrutiny panels with the right support, with 2 or 3 people. In fact, Trevor ran one, as he knows, he ran the BDO rectangle one with 3. I thought it worked well. There was a good mix of people there. We played off each other. We had different approaches, and I think if it's run with a bit of energy and vigour, you can run. You don't need more people around the table. Because I think that leads you sometimes into the old committee system.
It's maybe not the people, it's the ideas you need. It needs challenging,
absolutely. But that comes through other elements, and no doubt Deputy Musser will allude to these. The mix of the 3 people you have, and often you can have some very good debates if you've got that right mix, and you've got the right edge to the debate. The advisors you bring on board, are they people who ask good questions, who shake the tree, and so forth? It's not just a question of numbers, it's a question of how you run the process.
Of the Magic 42, there's going to be no spare people floating about. Everybody who's elected is going to have a job, and there's not going to be that. If they're not on scrutiny, they're going to be a minister or assistant minister. There's not going to be any spare capacity to recruiting people onto panels, and if you have a short term, somebody wants to do a sub panel on something, there's not going to be sufficient people to go around to do them all, is there? Because the system is obviously totally overloaded at the moment.
Well, is it overloaded? I mean, you alluded earlier that the way topics are chosen, for example, at the moment is a bit like choosing the Pope. There's some kind of mysterious process occurs.
And it's not only the process. I keep getting new responses as a member of the public who regularly sends in topics. We haven't got the time to do them. We haven't got capacity to do them. I'm being told that. So
but other topics are being dealt with.
Because other topics were not from the public. These are topics that are coming down from government. Do you want to scrutinise this? Yes or no? Oh yeah, we'll have a look at it. We'll rubber stamp it for you. That's the level at which the scrutiny is going on, and it fills up all the space.
But if I can come in on that, and you know yourself, you read between the lines, you're being told there's not enough time. Is that true, or is that we don't want to touch that subject? It's actually too spiky.
Well, our time's run out, so that's the end of our discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for yours.